I woke up one day to find my neighbor moving into my apartment without my knowledge, and that was the beginning of a long legal battle that would eventually end in a very unexpected way. That morning felt unreal. I was still half asleep when I heard footsteps and the sound of furniture dragging across the floor. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming, but when I stepped into my living room, I froze. My neighbor, yes, the woman who lived right next door, was inside my apartment, carrying boxes and acting like she belonged there. Her teenage son was pushing a suitcase across my hallway, and her little daughter was already sitting on my couch, eating chips like it was her own home. I just stood there, speechless. Finally, I blurted out, "What are you doing in my apartment?" She barely looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Oh, the landlord said I could stay here. It's all sorted out." Except it wasn't sorted out. Nobody told me anything, and I had never agreed to share my apartment with anyone. My name was the only one on the lease, and I paid the rent every month on time. So how could she just show up and move in? I immediately called the landlord. When he picked up, his voice sounded shaky. He told me not to worry, that there had been a paperwork issue, and that this arrangement was temporary. I demanded to know what he meant, but he just repeated, "Please stay calm. It will all be resolved soon." But how was I supposed to stay calm when someone was unpacking in my living room? Over the next few hours, she brought in more boxes, clothes, and even her kitchen utensils. My kitchen shelves, which I had carefully organized, started filling with her dishes. My bathroom counter was crowded with her makeup and hair products. Everywhere I looked, her stuff was spreading like she was taking over. I tried confronting her again. I told her she had no right to be here, that this was my apartment, my lease, my home. She just looked at me with this smug smile and said, "Legally, I'm allowed. If you have a problem, talk to the landlord." The arrogance in her tone made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, but I felt trapped. She wasn't leaving, and the landlord wasn't giving me answers. That first night was the most uncomfortable night of my life. Imagine trying to sleep in your own bedroom while strangers occupy your living room. I locked my door and pushed a chair against it, just in case. I barely slept a few hours, and when I got up the next morning, the smell of her cooking filled the entire apartment. She had used my pans, my spices, and even left dirty dishes in the sink. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Things escalated quickly. Each day, she brought in more of her belongings. My closet, once neatly arranged, now had her clothes hanging next to mine. My fridge was crammed with her food, and some of my groceries had mysteriously disappeared. Her kids acted like the apartment was theirs, sprawling on the couch, leaving trash everywhere, blasting music late at night. And then came the breaking point. One evening, I came home from work, slid my key into the lock, and it didn't turn. My key didn't fit anymore. She had changed the lock on my apartment door. I pounded on the door furiously until she finally opened it, standing there with her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. She said, "Oh, don't worry. You can always knock. We just needed a new lock for safety." I was beyond furious, my own home, and I had to knock to get inside. That's when I knew this wasn't just some misunderstanding. It was the start of a nightmare that I wasn't prepared for. After she changed the lock, everything spiraled out of control. I couldn't believe it. My own key didn't work in my own apartment. I had to stand outside, pounding on the door like a stranger, while my neighbor, the intruder, decided whether or not to let me inside. When she finally opened the door, she gave me this smug little grin and said, "You really shouldn't get so upset. It's just a lock. You can still come in if you knock." Her words made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to throw her out right then and there. But the terrifying part was, I realized I couldn't. She was already settled in, her boxes stacked. Against the walls, her kids sprawled across my couch. My home was no longer mine. It felt like I had been reduced to a guest in my own space. That night, I called the police. I thought they'd take one look at the situation, see the obvious trespassing, and throw her out. But instead, they stood in my living room listening to both sides of the story. She told them calmly that the landlord had given her permission, that it was a temporary housing arrangement, and that she was well within her rights to be there. The officer turned to me and said, "This looks like a civil matter. We can't remove her without a court order." I was stunned. A civil matter? She had literally stolen my home, and they were telling me to get a lawyer. The days after that were a nightmare. Every time I entered the apartment, she acted like I was the intruder. She told her kids to be polite to the visitor. She would give me dirty looks whenever I walked past. Once I overheard her on the phone laughing, saying, "Don't worry, this place will be ours soon." I felt like I was losing my mind. I hired a lawyer immediately. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I needed help. My lawyer reviewed my lease, shook his head, and told me this was going to be a long and messy fight. Apparently, cases like this weren't as rare as I thought. There were loopholes, squatter rights, landlord lies, and endless paperwork. Meanwhile, my neighbor was making herself more comfortable every day. She painted over one of my walls without asking. She replaced my curtains with hers. She even sold one of my chairs online, claiming it was in her way. When I confronted her, she smirked and said, "You'll thank me later." My stress levels skyrocketed. I couldn't sleep properly. I couldn't eat without feeling sick, and I was constantly anxious about what she would do next. Coming home from work felt like walking into enemy territory. To make matters worse, the landlord avoided me completely. He ignored my calls, dodged my questions, and even pretended not to see me when I ran into him outside the building. He was the one who had caused this chaos. Yet he was acting like it had nothing to do with him. The first time we went to court, I thought everything would be resolved. I had the lease, the rent receipts, proof that I was the legal tenant. But she came in with a lawyer too, and suddenly everything wasn't so clear. She claimed she had a verbal agreement with the landlord that I was behind on rent, which was a complete lie, and that the apartment had been promised to her months earlier. The judge didn't make any immediate decision. Instead, the case was postponed for further investigation, so the waiting began. Weeks dragged into months. My lawyer kept filing motions, her lawyer kept fighting back, and all the while, I was stuck sharing my home with someone who acted like she owned it. I couldn't invite friends over anymore. It was too humiliating. She would glare at them, make rude comments, or even tell them to leave. My social life collapsed. My work performance suffered, and my mental health hit rock bottom. One evening, after another long day at work, I opened the door and found that she had completely rearranged my furniture. My couch was on the opposite wall. My dining table was pushed into the corner, and my bedroom door had a lock on it that I didn't install. She had literally locked me out of my own bedroom until I forced her to open it. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just staying, temporarily. She was trying to erase me from my own apartment step by step, and the scariest part? The legal system was moving painfully slow, and every day that passed made her presence feel more permanent. This wasn't just about an apartment anymore. It was turning into a psychological war, and I was losing ground. After months of legal, back and forth, endless arguments, and sleepless nights, the case finally reached a surprising conclusion. The court recognized my lease as valid and confirmed my rights as the sole tenant. My neighbor was ordered to vacate the apartment immediately. When she left, I walked through my home, exhausted but relieved. Everything was still a mess. Furniture, out of place, boxes everywhere. But it was finally mine again. The experience left me shaken. I had learned how quickly life could turn upside down, how people could overstep boundaries, and how patience and persistence were my only allies in the face of chaos. And though my apartment was back under my control, the memory of that strange, unsettling ordeal would stay with me forever. And so, our story comes to an end today. But in the world of Mac's fables, Every tale carries a lesson and leaves an impact. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you won't miss our upcoming tales, here, where stories come to life.